The telegram arrived at the Fairweather Ranch on a morning so cold that Josephine Palmer's fingers went numb before she could finish reading it. And even though she stood in the December sun of Portland, Oregon Territory, in 1873, she felt nothing but the familiar emptiness that had lived in her chest since childhood. She folded the paper carefully, tucking it into the worn pocket of her traveling dress, as the stagecoach driver called for final boarding. Everything she owned fit into one battered carpetbag, and as she climbed aboard the coach that would take her another 20 miles east into the mountains, she wondered if the position as housekeeper would last any longer than the others. They never did. People always complained she was too distant, too cold, unable to provide the warmth a proper household required. What they did not understand was that you could not give what you had never possessed. The ranch came into view just as the afternoon sun began its descent behind the Cascade Peaks. Josephine pressed her face to the coach window, studying the sprawling property with its sturdy timber buildings and endless fences that seemed to stretch toward the horizon. Cattle dotted the brown winter fields, their breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. Smoke rose from the main house chimney, and for just a moment, something stirred in her chest before she pushed it down. Hope was dangerous. Fletcher Fairweather stood on the porch as the coach rolled to a stop, his tall frame silhouetted against the house. He was younger than Josephine had expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of summer grass, despite the winter surrounding them. He wore work clothes, not the fine suits she had seen on wealthy ranch owners in town, and his hands bore the calluses of a man who did not shy from hard labor. "Miss Palmer." His voice was deep, carrying easily across the yard without shouting. "Yes, sir." Josephine stepped down from the coach, refusing the driver's offered hand as she always did. Touch felt foreign to her, uncomfortable in ways she could never explain. Fletcher moved down the steps with an easy grace, reaching for her bag. "Let me help you with that. I can manage." The words came out sharper than intended, but she saw no offense register on his face. Instead, something like understanding flickered in those green eyes. "I am sure you can," he said quietly. "But you have had a long journey. Please allow me this courtesy." There was something in his tone, a gentleness that did not feel condescending, that made Josephine release her grip on the bag. Fletcher took it easily, though she noticed he made no attempt to touch her hand in the transfer. "Come inside. It is warmer there." He led her up the porch steps and through a heavy oak door into the main house. The warmth hit her immediately, radiating from a massive stone fireplace that dominated the main room. Josephine stood frozen just inside the doorway, her body physically recoiling from the heat even as something deep within her ached for it. The room was well appointed but clearly lacked a woman's touch. Furniture sat at odd angles, and dust gathered on surfaces that should have gleamed. Books lay scattered across tables, and a half-finished game of solitaire occupied the dining table. "I apologize for the state of things," Fletcher said, setting her bag down near the stairs. "My sister Ellen used to manage the household, but she married last spring and moved to California with her husband. I have been managing on my own since then, but as you can see, housekeeping is not among my talents. That is why I am here." Josephine forced herself to step further into the warmth, though her hands trembled slightly as she removed her thin coat. She wore only a simple wool dress beneath, dark blue and severely cut, with long sleeves and a high collar. No ornament, no decoration, nothing to draw attention. Fletcher watched her with those observant eyes. "When did you last eat?" The question surprised her. "I had bread this morning. That was 12 hours ago." He moved toward the kitchen without waiting for a response. "Sit by the fire. I will prepare something. Mr. Fairweather, I am the housekeeper. Cooking is my responsibility. Not today. He paused in the doorway, looking back at her. Today you are a person who has traveled a great distance in the cold and needs food and rest. Tomorrow we can discuss responsibilities. Josephine wanted to argue, but exhaustion weighed heavy in her bones. She moved toward the fire reluctantly, choosing a chair positioned slightly away from the direct heat. Even this proximity made her uncomfortable, though she could not articulate why. The warmth felt invasive, trying to seep into places she had sealed off long ago. Fletcher returned 20 minutes later with beef stew, fresh bread, and hot coffee. The aroma made Josephine's stomach clench with sudden hunger, though she accepted the plate with only a quiet thank you. They ate in silence, Fletcher settling into a chair across from her with his own meal. "The telegram mentioned you came from a position in Salem," he asked eventually. "Yes, I worked for the Morrison family for 3 months. Why did you leave?" Josephine set down her spoon carefully. "Mrs. Morrison felt I was unsuitable for a household with children. She said I was too cold, that I frightened the little ones." She waited for Fletcher to withdraw the offer of employment, for that familiar look of discomfort to cross his features. Instead, he simply nodded. "There are no children here," he said. "Just myself, the ranch hands who have their own bunkhouse, and now you. The main house is yours to manage as you see fit." "Why did you hire me?" The question emerged before Josephine could stop it. "The agency must have told you about my previous positions." "None have lasted more than 4 months. Fletcher met her gaze steadily. "They told me you are the hardest worker they have ever placed, that you are honest, efficient, and skilled. They also said you have difficulty connecting with people." He paused, setting down his own plate. "I do not need connection, Miss Palmer. I need someone who will do the work without expecting anything beyond fair wages and respectful treatment. Can you do that?" Something in Josephine's chest tightened. "Yes." "Then we have an understanding." Fletcher stood, collecting the dishes. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. It has its own stove if you prefer privacy. I will see you in the morning." He left her sitting by the fire, and Josephine found herself staring into the flames, wondering what kind of man asked so little while seeming to see so much. The first week passed in a blur of work. Josephine rose before dawn, lighting fires throughout the house before Fletcher woke. She cooked substantial breakfasts of eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits, packed lunches for him to take into the fields, and prepared dinners that filled the house with warmth and aroma. Between meals, she scrubbed floors, beat rugs, washed windows, and organized every cluttered corner of the neglected house. Fletcher observed this whirlwind of activity with quiet appreciation. He thanked her for every meal, complimented her cooking, and respected the boundaries she unconsciously erected. He never stood too close, never touched her even in passing, never asked personal questions that might crack the armor she wore. Yet he also left small considerations that Josephine noticed despite herself. A new supply of firewood appeared outside her bedroom door each morning. Fresh flowers from the remaining autumn blooms showed up in a vase on the kitchen table. When she mentioned in passing that she enjoyed reading, the next day brought a stack of books he thought she might like. "You are spoiling me," she said one evening as she discovered yet another thoughtful gesture, this time a thick shawl to replace her threadbare one. Fletcher looked up from the ranch ledgers spread across the dining table. "I am ensuring my housekeeper has what she needs to be comfortable." "I have never been comfortable, Mr. Fairweather. I would not know what to do with it." The words emerged more honestly than she intended, and she saw something shift in his expression. Not pity, which she would have hated, but a deep understanding that made her throat tight. "Perhaps," he said carefully. It is time to learn." Josephine turned away, busying herself with unnecessary adjustments to the kitchen shelves. Some people are simply made different, cold inside where others are warm. I do not believe that. Fletcher's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. She heard him approach but felt no threat in his presence. "I think some people have been forced to build walls to survive. That does not mean they are cold. It means they are protecting something precious." "There is nothing precious in me." The confession came out barely above a whisper. "Then why do you work so hard? Why do you pour such care into every meal, every cleaned room, every small task?" Fletcher had moved closer, though he maintained careful distance. "I have watched you, Miss Palmer. You may believe yourself cold, but I see warmth in everything you do. You simply have not allowed yourself to feel it." Josephine's hands gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "You do not know anything about me. You are right, I do not." His voice remained gentle, never pushing. "But I would like to, if you would ever care to share." She said nothing, and after a moment, Fletcher returned to his ledgers. The conversation ended, but something had shifted in the air between them. Some invisible barrier had been acknowledged, even if not yet breached. Winter deepened across the Oregon mountains. Snow fell in heavy sheets, transforming the ranch into a world of white silence. The cattle were moved to closer pastures. The hands worked shorter days, and the isolation that came with mountain winters settled over the property like a blanket. Josephine found herself spending more evenings in the main room, drawn by the massive fireplace, even as part of her still recoiled from its warmth. Fletcher would work on his ledgers or read, occasionally sharing interesting passages aloud. She would mend clothes or knit, her hands always busy, her mind gradually growing accustomed to companionable silence. "Tell me something about yourself," Fletcher said one evening in late January. Snow pattered against the windows and the wind howled through the mountain passes. "Anything at all." "Your favorite color, perhaps." Josephine's hands stilled on her knitting. "I do not have one. Everyone has a favorite color. I do not think about such things." Fletcher closed his book, giving her his full attention. "Then tell me something you do think about." She considered refusing, maintaining the walls as she always had. But something about the long winter night, the warm firelight, and Fletcher's patient presence made her want to try. "I think about survival," she said finally. "About making myself useful enough to keep. About staying invisible enough to avoid trouble. About building a life from nothing, because nothing is all I have ever had." "Where did you grow up?" "An orphanage in Portland. The Sisters of Mercy took me in when I was a baby. They said I was left on the steps during a snowstorm, wrapped in rags, nearly frozen to death." Josephine's voice remained flat, reciting facts rather than feelings. "I lived there until I was 16, then went into service. Did the sisters treat you well?" "They fed and clothed me. They taught me to read and work. They did their duty." She resumed knitting, the needles clicking rhythmically. "But there were 30 children and only 5 sisters. There was no time for warmth or affection. We were taught that such things were unnecessary luxuries." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment. "Is that when you learned to be cold?" "I was always cold. Even as a child, the other orphans avoided me. They said I was strange, that I did not laugh or cry like normal children. The sisters agreed. They told me I had a deficit of spirit, that I should pray for God to warm my frozen heart." She paused, a bitter smile crossing her lips. "I prayed for years. Nothing changed." "Perhaps," Fletcher said softly, "there was nothing wrong with you to begin with. Perhaps you were simply protecting yourself in the only way you knew how. You seem determined to find good in me, Mr. Fairweather. Because it is there, Miss Palmer, whether you see it or not." That night, Lying in her bed with the small stove warming her room, Josephine allowed herself to wonder what it might be like to believe him. To imagine that the coldness she wore like armor was not the truth of who she was, but merely a shell that might someday crack. The next morning brought a blizzard that raged for 3 days, trapping everyone inside. The ranch hands stayed in their bunkhouse, and Fletcher remained in the main house with Josephine. They fell into an easy rhythm, working together in ways that felt natural despite her usual discomfort with proximity. Fletcher would haul wood and water, maintain the fires, and tend to essential outdoor tasks during brief lulls in the storm. Josephine cooked elaborate meals with their stored supplies, finding satisfaction in creating warmth and sustenance against the howling cold outside. On the second evening, Fletcher taught her to play chess. Josephine protested that she had no mind for games, but he insisted, patiently explaining strategies until she began to understand the patterns. They played for hours, the fire crackling beside them, and Josephine realized with some surprise that she was enjoying herself. "You learn quickly," Fletcher commented as she captured his knight. "I have always been good with patterns and logic, but you claim to have no mind for games." He moved his bishop with a smile. "I think you simply never had anyone patient enough to teach you." The sisters believed games were frivolous. "Games teach us to think, to plan, to see possibilities." Fletcher met her eyes across the board. "They also teach us to enjoy ourselves, which is far from frivolous." Josephine considered her next move carefully. "I am not accustomed to enjoyment." "I have noticed." He spoke gently, without judgment. "You approach everything as work, even rest. When did you last do something simply because it brought you pleasure?" She could not remember. Every action in her life had been calculated for utility, for survival, for proving her worth to whoever currently employed her. The concept of acting purely for joy felt foreign, almost dangerous. "Check," she said instead of answering. Fletcher studied the board, then smiled. "Well played, Miss Palmer. Very well played indeed." They finished the game in comfortable silence, and when Josephine finally won, Fletcher's genuine delight in her victory created an unfamiliar warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. On the third day, the storm broke. Brilliant sunshine flooded across endless snow, transforming the ranch into a dazzling white wonderland. Josephine stood at the kitchen window, watching Fletcher dig paths through drifts that reached his chest. He had removed his coat despite the cold, working in shirt sleeves, his breath creating clouds in the frozen air. Sweat dampened his hair, and his face was flushed with exertion. There was something beautiful in his strength, in the easy power of his movements, and Josephine found herself unable to look away. When he finally came inside, stamping snow from his boots, she had hot coffee and fresh bread waiting. Fletcher accepted both with grateful thanks, settling at the kitchen table while she returned to preparing dinner. "Miss Palmer," he said after a moment, "I have been thinking." "About what?" She did not turn from the stove. "About your wages. I am not paying you enough for all you do." "You pay me the standard rate." "The standard rate for a housekeeper, perhaps, but you do far more than keep house. You manage supplies, plan meals, maintain equipment, and keep this entire household running smoothly. I want to increase your salary." Josephine turned to face him, surprise breaking through her usual composure. "That is not necessary." "It is necessary to me." Fletcher's expression was serious. "You deserve to be valued for your work, Miss Palmer. Moreover, you deserve to build security for your future. I want you to have savings, resources of your own, freedom if you will." "Why?" The question emerged sharper than intended. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Fletcher held her gaze steadily. "Because in the months you have been here, this house has become a home." Because you work harder than anyone I have ever known, yet expect nothing in return. Because you deserve kindness, even if you do not believe it yourself." He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features. "And because I have come to care about you, Josephine, very much." The use of her first name sent a shock through her system. No one had called her Josephine since the orphanage. She had been Miss Palmer to every employer, every stranger, everyone who entered and exited her carefully controlled life. "You should not care about me." She gripped the edge of the stove, needing its solid presence. "I am not capable of returning such feelings. I am not asking you to return anything." Fletcher stood but made no move toward her. "I am simply being honest about my own heart. What you do with that honesty is entirely your choice." He left the kitchen, and Josephine stood trembling beside the stove, her careful walls cracking in ways that terrified her. February arrived with slightly warmer temperatures, and the first hints that winter might eventually end. The ranch work intensified as Fletcher, and his hands prepared for spring calving. He left earlier each morning and returned later each evening, often exhausted and filthy, but always with a smile for Josephine and appreciation for whatever meal she had prepared. She found herself watching for his return, listening for the sound of his boots on the porch, feeling a strange emptiness in the house when he was gone. These feelings frightened her, but she could not seem to stop them. One evening, Fletcher returned from the fields with a deep gash across his forearm, blood soaking through his torn shirt. Josephine's heart lurched in a way she had never experienced. "It is nothing," he said when she gasped. "Just a disagreement with some barbed wire. Sit down." Her voice trembled despite her attempt at composure. "Let me see it." Fletcher obeyed, settling into a kitchen chair while Josephine gathered clean cloth, warm water, and the medical supplies she kept organized in the pantry. She had tended injuries before in previous positions, always with efficient detachment. But as she carefully cleaned Fletcher's wound, her hands shook. "You are afraid," he observed quietly. "I am simply concerned about infection." She focused on her work, not meeting his eyes. "Josephine." His other hand moved as if to touch hers, then stopped, respecting her boundaries even now. "Look at me." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I am all right," Fletcher said gently. "I promise. This is not even the worst injury I have had this month." "That does not comfort me." The admission escaped before she could contain it. "Why not?" "Because I do not want you hurt. Because the thought of something happening to you makes me feel things I do not understand. Because I think I might be going mad." Fletcher's expression softened with such tenderness that Josephine's vision blurred. "You are not going mad. You are feeling. Perhaps for the first time in your life you are allowing yourself to truly feel. I do not know how." She returned her attention to his arm, wrapping it carefully. "I do not know how to do this." "Do what? Care about someone? Let someone care about me, be anything other than cold and alone." Fletcher waited until she finished bandaging his wound, then very slowly, telegraphing every movement, he reached up and touched her face. Just the lightest brush of his fingers against her cheek, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Josephine froze, every instinct screaming at her to retreat. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. A desperate hunger for exactly this kind of gentle contact, this simple human warmth. "I have never known warmth," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not really. Not the kind that comes from another person choosing to care. I do not know if I am capable of it." "Then let me show you." Fletcher's thumb traced her cheekbone, his touch impossibly tender. "Let me teach you warmth, Josephine, the same way I taught you chess. One small move at a time with all the patience in the world." A sound escaped her throat, something between a laugh and a sob. "Why? Why would you want that burden?" "Because you are not a burden." Because beneath all this cold you insist you carry, I see a woman of incredible strength and beauty. Because I have been falling in love with you since the day you stepped off that stagecoach, and I cannot pretend otherwise anymore." The words shattered something in Josephine's carefully constructed walls. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and unfamiliar, and she did not know whether they came from fear or relief, or some overwhelming combination of both. Fletcher pulled her gently into his arms, holding her while she wept against his chest. She had not cried in 15 years, not since the sisters taught her that tears were weakness. But here in Fletcher's embrace, surrounded by warmth and safety and impossible tenderness, the frozen places inside her began to thaw. "I do not know how to do this," she repeated against his shirt. "We will figure it out together." His hand stroked her hair with infinite gentleness. "I promise you, Josephine, together." The thaw came to Josephine's heart even more surely than it came to the mountain snow. Fletcher courted her with patient determination, respecting every boundary while gently encouraging her to explore beyond them. He began taking her on evening walks around the property as the weather warmed, pointing out early wildflowers and the first green shoots of spring. He would offer his arm, waiting until she chose to take it, celebrating each small gesture of trust as the victory it was. They continued their chess games, but now Fletcher would sometimes reach across the board to touch her hand, brief connections that sent warmth flooding through Josephine's body. She learned to return these touches, awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. One evening in March, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountain peaks in shades of gold and rose, Fletcher told her about his childhood. About parents who died of influenza when he was 19, leaving him and Ellen to run the ranch alone. About the loneliness of building a life from grief, about understanding what it meant to wall off your heart for survival. "We are not so different, you and I," he said, his hand warm around hers. "We have both learned to protect ourselves. The difference is that I had Ellen to remind me how to love. You had no one. I have you now." The words came easier than Josephine expected. Fletcher turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the sunset. "Do you?" Truly, she understood what he was asking. Not whether she would remain as his housekeeper, but whether she would risk her heart, whether she would choose warmth over the safety of cold isolation. "I am terrified," she admitted, "of failing you, of discovering I am truly as cold as I have always believed, of losing this if I prove incapable of warmth." "Josephine." Fletcher shifted to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "You have already proven yourself capable of warmth. Every meal you cook with such care, every room you tend with quiet pride, every small kindness you show while pretending you are merely being efficient, that is all warmth, whether you recognize it or not. Then why can I not feel it? Because you have spent your entire life being told you are deficient, being taught that the ways you express care are wrong or inadequate. But they are not wrong, Josephine. They are simply yours." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I do not need you to transform into someone else. I need you exactly as you are, with all your careful walls and hard-won strength. I just need you to let me in. What if I cannot give you what you deserve? What if you give me more than I ever dreamed possible?" Fletcher smiled, that warm expression that always made her chest feel strange. "Will you try, Josephine? Will you give us a chance?" She thought about the month since she arrived at the ranch, about how this place had become the first home she could remember, about how Fletcher's patience had created space for her to exist without pretense, to work without fear, to slowly discover parts of herself she had never known existed. She thought about warmth, and how maybe it was not just one thing. Maybe warmth was Fletcher's gentle persistence. Maybe it was the satisfaction of creating a comfortable home. Maybe it was the terrifying, exhilarating feeling currently flooding her chest as she looked into his hopeful eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "I will try." Fletcher's smile could have lit the darkening sky. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to retreat, and pressed the softest kiss to her forehead. Even that chaste contact sent heat spiraling through Josephine's body, and she found herself leaning into his warmth rather than away from it. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. "Thank you for trusting me." They sat together on the porch until the stars emerged, and Josephine marveled at how the cold mountain air no longer seemed to touch her. For the first time in her memory, she felt truly warm. The courtship continued through spring and into early summer. Fletcher taught Josephine to ride, spending patient hours helping her overcome her fear of the large animals. She learned to trust the horse beneath her, to feel the rhythm of its movement, and eventually to experience the joy of galloping across open fields with Fletcher beside her. She taught him to cook more elaborate meals, finding pleasure in sharing her knowledge with someone who genuinely wanted to learn. They would work side by side in the kitchen, Fletcher's attempts often comical but improving steadily, and Josephine discovered she enjoyed the collaborative intimacy. They talked endlessly, making up for all the years both had spent locked in solitude. Fletcher shared his dreams for the ranch, for breeding better cattle and expanding the operation. Josephine confessed her desire to read every book ever written, to learn everything the orphanage had never taught her. "We should get you more books," Fletcher said immediately. "Whatever subjects interest you." "That seems frivolous. Education is never frivolous." He touched her face with the casual affection she was slowly learning to accept. "Besides, I love hearing you talk about what you have learned. Your mind is remarkable, Josephine." No one had ever called her remarkable before. The compliment created a warmth in her chest that lingered for days. By June, Josephine's touches had grown bolder. She would brush hair from Fletcher's forehead, straighten his collar, rest her hand on his shoulder in passing. Each gesture felt like a small rebellion against the coldness she had been taught to accept in herself. Fletcher responded with equal care, always watching for signs of discomfort, celebrating each new level of intimacy they achieved. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. He held her hand whenever they walked. He pulled her close on cool evenings, wrapping his arms around her while they watched the sunset. But he had not yet kissed her mouth, and Josephine found herself wanting it with an intensity that surprised her. One evening in early July, she decided to be brave. They were in the main room, ostensibly reading, but Josephine had been watching Fletcher over the top of her book for the past 20 minutes. "Fletcher," he looked up immediately. "Yes. Why have you not kissed me, properly, I mean?" Color rose in his cheeks and something heated flickered in his green eyes. "Because I did not want to rush you, because I know physical intimacy is difficult for you." It was difficult. Josephine set down her book, her heart pounding. "But I find I want it now. I want you to kiss me." Fletcher rose from his chair, moving to where she sat on the sofa. He knelt before her, bringing them eye to eye, and cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "Are you certain?" "I am terrified," she admitted. "But yes, I am certain. We can stop whenever you want, just say the word." Josephine nodded, not trusting her voice, and Fletcher leaned forward to capture her lips with his. The kiss was gentle at first, almost chaste, giving her time to adjust to the sensation. But as Josephine relaxed into it, Fletcher deepened the contact, his mouth moving against hers with tender passion. Heat exploded through her body, pooling low in her belly, and she gasped against his lips. Fletcher pulled back immediately. "Too much." "No." Josephine's voice came out breathless. "Not enough." His eyes darkened with desire, but he remained careful, controlled. Josephine, if we continue, I do not know if I can maintain restraint. I want you too much. Then do not maintain restraint. She touched his face, marveling at her own boldness. I want this, Fletcher, I want you. Please. Are you absolutely certain? Because once we cross this line, there is no going back. I do not want to go back. Josephine leaned forward, kissing him with all the passion she had spent 24 years suppressing. I only want forward with you. Fletcher groaned against her mouth, his control finally breaking. He rose from his knees, pulling Josephine up with him, and deepened the kiss until she felt dizzy with want. His hands moved over her body, still careful but increasingly bold, and everywhere he touched burned with delicious heat. Upstairs, he murmured against her neck. I want to do this properly. He swept her into his arms, carrying her up the stairs to his bedroom. Josephine clung to him, half afraid and half exhilarated, trusting him to guide her through this unfamiliar territory. Fletcher set her gently on the bed, then paused, studying her face in the lamplight. Last chance to change your mind. I will not change my mind. She reached for his shirt, fumbling with the buttons. Show me warmth, Fletcher. Show me everything I have been missing. He did, with patient tenderness that gradually gave way to passionate intensity. He taught her body the same way he had taught her chess, one small move at a time, celebrating each discovery. When Josephine finally shattered in his arms, the warmth that flooded through her was like nothing she had ever imagined possible. Afterward, lying tangled in Fletcher's embrace, Josephine finally understood what she had been missing all her life. This was warmth, true warmth, the kind that came from being known completely and cherished anyway. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I did not think I was capable of it, but I love you so much it terrifies me. Fletcher tightened his arms around her, pressing a kiss to her hair. I love you too, more than I have words to express. What happens now? Now, he said, humor warming his voice, you marry me and make me the happiest man in Oregon Territory. Josephine pulled back to look at his face. Was that a proposal? A terrible one, I admit. Fletcher shifted, reaching toward the nightstand. He retrieved a small box and opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a single sapphire. Let me try again. Josephine Palmer, you have transformed my house into a home and my life into something beautiful. You have taught me that strength comes in many forms, and that the capacity for love has nothing to do with how easily one shows it. I want to spend every remaining day proving to you that warmth is not something you lack, but something you embody in your own perfect way. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks, but for once they did not frighten her. Yes, yes, I will marry you. Fletcher slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with such tenderness that Josephine felt herself melting all over again. She had spent her entire life believing she was fundamentally broken, incapable of the warmth that came so naturally to others. But here in Fletcher's arms, she finally understood the truth. She had never been cold. She had simply been waiting for someone patient enough to help her thaw. They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Portland. Fletcher's ranch hands attended, along with a few friends from neighboring properties and the minister who had known Fletcher since childhood. Josephine wore a new dress of cream silk, the first beautiful thing she had ever owned, and Fletcher looked at her as though she were the most precious treasure in the world. I give you warmth against coldness, he said during their vows, departing from the traditional script. I give you patience, understanding, and love without condition. I give you a home and a heart that will never turn you away. Josephine's voice shook as she responded. I give you all that I am and all that I am learning to be. I give you my trust, my loyalty, and my love. I give you warmth in the only ways I know, and I promise to keep learning new ones. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her so thoroughly that several guests laughed and applauded. Josephine felt her cheeks burn, but she did not pull away. She was learning to accept affection publicly, learning that showing love was not weakness but strength. The ranch hands had prepared a celebration back at the property, with tables laden with food and a fiddle player providing music. Josephine watched Fletcher laugh with his friends, saw how respected and beloved he was, and marveled that this man had chosen her. "You look deep in thought," Fletcher said, appearing at her elbow with 2 cups of punch. "I am thinking about how different my life could have been." She accepted the cup, her fingers brushing his. "If you had not seen past my coldness." There was never any coldness to see past, only walls that anyone who had lived your life would have built. Fletcher touched her cheek gently. "Are you happy, Josephine?" She considered the question carefully, wanting to answer with complete honesty. "I am. More than I ever imagined possible. Sometimes I still feel awkward, still struggle to express what I feel in ways that seem natural to others. But I am learning. With you, I am learning. Good." He leaned down to kiss her softly. "Because you have a lifetime to learn, and I have a lifetime to teach you that your way of loving is just as valid as anyone else's." The party continued late into the evening, and when Fletcher finally carried his bride across the threshold of their home, Josephine felt a sense of belonging she had never known. This was her home now, her husband, her life. She was finally, truly warm. The first year of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Josephine struggled sometimes with the casual intimacy Fletcher offered so easily. There were moments when touch felt overwhelming, when she needed to retreat to solitude to regroup. But Fletcher never took offense. He simply gave her space when she needed it and welcomed her back without questions when she was ready in turn. She learned his rhythms and needs. She discovered that Fletcher carried his own burdens, his own fears of failing those he loved. She learned to offer comfort in her careful way, through thoughtful gestures and quiet presence, and found that he valued these expressions as much as more dramatic declarations. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Fletcher handled the cattle and land, while Josephine managed the household finances with remarkable skill. She had a gift for numbers and organization that made the business side of ranching more efficient than it had ever been. "You should be my partner, not just my wife," Fletcher said one evening, showing her the books that proved their increased profits. "Your contributions deserve recognition. I am happy supporting you, but I want more for you than that." He pulled her onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I want you to have ownership, autonomy, pride in what you have built." Josephine leaned back against his chest, still marveling that she could accept such affection without discomfort. "Then make me your partner, in all things." He did, legally adding her name to the ranch deed and business papers. Josephine Palmer Fairweather, co-owner of one of the most successful ranches in the Oregon Territory. She had gone from orphan to housekeeper to equal partner, and the journey still sometimes felt impossible. Their second spring together brought unexpected news. Josephine had been feeling ill for weeks, struggling with nausea and exhaustion that she attributed to a persistent stomach ailment. When the local doctor finally examined her, his diagnosis shocked her into silence. "You are with child, Mrs. Fairweather. I would estimate about 3 months along." Josephine sat frozen in the doctor's office, unable to process the information. A baby. She was going to have a baby. The thought filled her with terror. Fletcher found her sitting on their bed that evening, staring at nothing, her hands folded protectively over her still flat stomach. "The doctor told me," he said gently, sitting beside her. "Are you all right?" "No." The word came out choked. "Fletcher, I do not know how to be a mother. I barely know how to be a wife. How can I possibly care for a child when I am still learning to feel warmth myself, the same way you have learned everything else?" He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "One day at a time, with patience and love and the understanding that there is no single right way to do this. But what if I am cold with our child? What if I cannot give them the warmth they need?" Fletcher turned her to face him, his expression fierce with conviction. "Josephine, I have watched you transform this house, this ranch, our entire lives with your particular brand of warmth. You show love through action, through care, through countless small gestures that prove devotion far more than words ever could. Our child will be so loved, so cherished, so completely cared for, I have absolutely no doubt. But what if I cannot hold them? What if touch remains difficult? Then we will figure it out together. Perhaps you will surprise yourself. Perhaps the instinct to nurture your own child will override old fears. Or perhaps you will express maternal love in your own unique way, and our child will be richer for it." He pressed a hand gently over hers on her stomach. "This baby is already so lucky to have you as a mother." Josephine wanted to believe him, but fear remained a constant companion throughout her pregnancy. She read every book she could find about childbirth and infant care, approaching motherhood with the same determined efficiency she brought to everything else. Fletcher supported her completely, never dismissing her fears while gently encouraging her to trust herself. As her body changed, Josephine found herself experiencing new sensations. The first flutter of movement inside her brought tears to her eyes. This was her child, growing beneath her heart, completely dependent on the warmth of her body. Perhaps she had more warmth to give than she realized. The baby came in November, after a long, difficult labor that left Josephine exhausted but triumphant. Fletcher stayed by her side through it all, holding her hand, offering encouragement, his face pale with worry but his faith in her never wavering. When the doctor finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, Josephine looked down at her son with shock and wonder. He was red-faced and wrinkled, his tiny fists waving furiously, his cries filling the room. And as she held him against her chest, skin to skin, Josephine felt something crack wide open inside her. This was warmth. Pure, overwhelming, instinctive warmth flooding through every part of her being. This tiny person was hers to protect, to cherish, to love with a fierceness she had not known herself capable of. "Hello, Franklin," she whispered, using the name they had chosen together. "I am your mother, and I promise you I will never let you feel cold." Fletcher leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears. "Look at you. You are already perfect at this. I have not done anything yet. You are holding him like he is the most precious thing in the world. You are looking at him with more love than I have ever seen on any face. That is everything, Josephine. That is exactly what he needs." As Franklin quieted against her chest, his small body relaxing into her warmth, Josephine realized Fletcher was right. She might never be demonstrative the way some mothers were. She might not coo and chatter in baby talk. But she could love with every fiber of her being, protect with absolute dedication, and provide unwavering security. That was warmth enough. The early months of motherhood challenged Josephine in ways she had not anticipated. The constant demands, the sleepless nights, the responsibility of keeping another human alive all pressed against her carefully maintained composure. But Fletcher was there for every moment, sharing the burden, celebrating small victories, and reminding her that she was doing beautifully. Josephine discovered that while she might not be naturally effusive, she had infinite patience for her son. She would rock him for hours, speaking softly about everything and nothing, telling him about books she had read or plans for the ranch. She kept him close during the day, working with him strapped against her chest, her body providing the warmth and security he needed. "You are incredible," Fletcher said one evening, watching her expertly bathe their son while simultaneously discussing the next season's planting schedule. "How you manage everything so calmly." "I am not calm, I am terrified constantly." Josephine dried Franklin with gentle efficiency. "But I do not let the fear stop me. You taught me that. No, you knew it all along, I just helped you see it." As Franklin grew from infant to toddler, Josephine's confidence grew with him. She learned to interpret his needs, to comfort his tears, to encourage his curiosity. She was not a conventional mother by any means. She did not fuss or smother. But she was steady, reliable, endlessly patient, and completely devoted. Fletcher watched his wife bloom into motherhood with quiet pride. She had been so certain she could not provide warmth, yet she radiated it in ways that mattered far more than superficial affection. Franklin thrived under her careful attention, developing into a sturdy, curious child who clearly adored both his parents. When Franklin was 2, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news brought joy rather than fear. She knew now that she could do this, that her particular way of loving was exactly right for her children. The second baby arrived the following spring, a daughter they named Julia. Fletcher had lobbied gently for the name, pointing out how perfect it was that their daughter's name would start with J, just like her mother's. Josephine agreed, touched by his sentimentality. Julia was different from Franklin from the start, more demanding, more vocal about her needs. Where Franklin had been content with quiet companionship, Julia needed constant interaction. Josephine adapted, learning to provide the different kind of attention her daughter required while never making Franklin feel neglected. "You make it look easy," Fletcher said one afternoon, watching Josephine simultaneously help Franklin with a puzzle while nursing Julia. "It is not easy, but it is worth every difficulty." She smiled down at her children. "They have taught me more about warmth than I ever could have learned alone." "They are lucky to have you." "I am lucky to have them, to have all of you." Josephine met his eyes over their children's heads. "Remember when I told you I had never known warmth? I was wrong. I had simply never let myself recognize it. But now I am surrounded by it, drowning in it, made entirely of it." Fletcher crossed the room to kiss her, careful not to disturb Julia. "I love you, Josephine Fairweather. Thank you for taking a chance on warmth, on me, on this life we have built together. Thank you for being patient enough to teach me, for seeing something in me I could not see in myself. I saw the truth. I just helped you recognize it too." The years flowed by with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Franklin and Julia grew strong and healthy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, absorbing ranch skills from Fletcher while learning organization and efficiency from Josephine. 2 more children followed, a son named Frederick when Josephine was 30, and another daughter, Jane, when she was 33. Each child challenged her differently, teaching her new facets of warmth and love. Josephine remained who she fundamentally was, never becoming effortlessly affectionate or comfortable with excessive sentiment. But her children never doubted her love. It showed in every carefully prepared meal, every efficient solution to their problems, every quiet moment of patient instruction. Fletcher continued to be her partner in all things, their love deepening with each shared challenge and triumph. The ranch flourished beyond their wildest dreams, becoming known throughout the territory for quality cattle and expert management. They built a legacy together, brick by brick, season by season. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Fletcher found Josephine in her favorite spot on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Their 4 children were occupied in the house, and for a rare moment they had peace. "Do you remember what you said the day we met?" Fletcher asked, settling beside her and taking her hand. I said many things, most of them probably too sharp. You said there was nothing precious in you. He brought her hand to his lips. You were so wrong, Josephine. You are the most precious thing in my life. You and our children, this home we have built, the warmth that fills every corner of our existence. Josephine leaned her head against his shoulder, comfortable now with such casual affection. I was wrong about many things. I thought I was cold when I was merely protected. I thought I was incapable of warmth when I simply expressed it differently. I thought I was broken when I was actually just learning my own way of being whole. You were never broken. No, she agreed. I was not. But I needed you to help me see that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching darkness fall over their land. Laughter drifted from the house where their children played, and smoke rose from the chimney carrying the scent of dinner Josephine had prepared earlier. This was warmth, this life they had created together. Not the dramatic, overwhelming kind she had once thought she lacked, but the steady, enduring kind that sustained them through every season. You ever regret it? Josephine asked quietly. Choosing someone like me. Someone who still struggles sometimes with the easy affection others offer. Never. Fletcher's answer came immediately and firmly. You taught me that warmth comes in infinite varieties, that steady devotion matters more than grand gestures. That love expressed through action is just as valid as love expressed through words. You made me a better man, Josephine. How could I ever regret that? She turned to kiss him, still feeling that flutter of wonder that she could offer such affection freely now. I love you, Fletcher Fairweather. Thank you for teaching me warmth. Thank you for becoming warmth against your own coldness, for proving that healing is possible and that love can transform even the most protected heart. He pulled her close, wrapping her in his embrace. Thank you for choosing to trust me with your carefully guarded self. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Josephine reflected on her journey from that frozen orphan on the church steps to this moment of complete contentment. She had spent so many years believing herself deficient, incapable of the warmth that defined humanity. But she had been wrong. Warmth was not one thing. It was not just easy laughter or casual touches or words of affection freely given. Warmth was also fierce protection, steady presence, and devoted action. It was knowing someone completely and loving them anyway. It was building a life together, one day at a time, with patience and determination. Josephine had never lacked warmth. She had simply needed to find someone patient enough to help her recognize her own fire. The children grew and eventually began families of their own. Franklin took over much of the daily ranch operations, proving to have inherited his father's skill with animals and his mother's head for business. Julia married a neighboring rancher's son and started her own homestead nearby. Frederick studied law and became an advocate for fair labor practices in Oregon's growing cities. Jane, the youngest, showed remarkable talent for teaching and eventually opened a school for girls in Portland. Josephine watched her children flourish with quiet pride. Each had learned different lessons from her particular brand of maternal warmth. They were all strong, capable, and secure in themselves, proof that love expressed through steady devotion was just as valuable as more effusive affection. Fletcher aged gracefully beside her, his dark hair going silver, his face gaining lines that spoke of years of laughter and hard work. They celebrated 30 years together, then 40, still partners in every sense, still learning new ways to show their love. When they were both in their 60s, Fletcher fell ill. What started as a simple cough developed into pneumonia that left him weak and struggling. Josephine nursed him with the same fierce determination she brought to everything, refusing to accept that, after all these years together, she might lose him. You need to rest, Fletcher said weakly from their bed. You have been caring for me for weeks without sleep. I will rest when you are well. Josephine wrung out a cool cloth, pressing it to his fevered forehead. You stayed with me through Franklin's difficult birth. I will stay with you through this. Stubborn woman. You knew what you were getting when you married me. Fletcher managed a smile, catching her hand. I got the best thing that ever happened to me. I got warmth against coldness, love against loneliness, partnership against solitude. I got everything, Josephine. Do not talk as though you are saying goodbye. Her voice shook despite her attempt at composure. You are not leaving me. I will not allow it. I am not planning on going anywhere. He squeezed her hand weakly. But if I did, I would go knowing I had the most extraordinary life. You gave me that, Josephine. You who thought you had nothing to give. Fletcher, please. I am not dying today, but someday I will, and so will you, and I need you to know that loving you was the greatest privilege of my existence. His green eyes, faded now but still warm, held her steadily. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not go back to believing you are cold. Promise me you will remember the warmth we built together. Tears streamed down Josephine's face. I promise, but you are not allowed to die yet. We have years left together. Then I will fight to stay. He brought her hand to his lips. For you, I will always fight. Fletcher recovered slowly, his constitution strong enough to weather the illness. But the scare reminded them both that their time together was precious and finite. They made the most of every day, sitting together on the porch, riding out to check on the grandchildren who now ran the ranch, sharing stories and memories and quiet contentment. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family gathered for a grand celebration. Children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filled the house and yard, testament to the life and love Josephine and Fletcher had built together. Speech. Someone called, and the crowd took up the chant until Fletcher rose, pulling Josephine up with him. 50 years ago, Fletcher began, his voice still strong despite his age. A young woman stepped off a stagecoach into my life, and nothing was ever the same. She confessed she had never known warmth, that she believed herself cold and incapable of love. She was wrong, but it took time to prove it to her. He turned to Josephine, taking both her hands. You became warmth against your own perceived coldness. You taught me that love comes in infinite varieties, that devotion expressed through action is just as powerful as devotion expressed through words. You built this family, this legacy, this incredible life with your particular brand of quiet strength and fierce loyalty. Josephine felt her throat tighten with emotion, still uncomfortable with such public declarations but learning even now to accept them. I became warmth against your coldness, Fletcher continued, but you were never truly cold. You were simply waiting for someone to recognize the fire you kept carefully banked. Thank you for letting me tend that fire. Thank you for 50 years of partnership, love, and incredible warmth. You are, and always will be, the best thing that ever happened to me. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Josephine, never comfortable with attention, allowed Fletcher to pull her into an embrace while their family celebrated around them. That was quite a speech, she murmured against his chest. Every word was true. He kissed her forehead. Are you happy, Josephine? After all these years, after everything we have been through, are you happy? She pulled back to look at him, at his beloved face marked by time and experience, at the green eyes that still saw her completely and loved what they found. I am more than happy. I am whole. I am warm. I am everything I never believed I could be. She smiled, the expression coming easily now after 50 years of practice. I love you, Fletcher Fairweather. Thank you for teaching me warmth, for becoming warmth against my coldness, for showing me that I was never broken, just waiting for the right person to help me bloom. The privilege was entirely mine. Fletcher kissed her softly, to the delight of their watching family. Here is to 50 more years. That seems ambitious. Then to however many years we have left. I will treasure every single one. They stood together in the midst of their celebrating family, surrounded by the legacy of love they had built. The orphan girl who believed herself cold and the rancher who saw her warmth. Together they had created something beautiful, something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. Josephine Fairweather had learned the truth about warmth. It was not something you either possessed or lacked. It was something you built, day by day, choice by choice, with patience and determination and the willingness to keep trying even when it felt impossible. It was what you created when you found someone who believed in you enough to wait while you learned to believe in yourself. She had been cold once, or thought she was. But Fletcher had become warmth against that coldness, had shown her that she carried her own fire all along. And together, they had built something that would burn bright for generations to come. As the celebration continued around them, Josephine leaned into her husband's embrace and felt nothing but warmth. In her heart, in her home, in every corner of the life they had created together. She had never known warmth as a child, but she had spent the last 50 years drowning in it, creating it, becoming it. And that made all the cold, lonely years before worth enduring. Because they had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this beautiful, warm, extraordinary life. She was Josephine Fairweather, and she had finally, truly come home,